Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome to this morning's session. Localized, optimized, and not surprised. All right, leveraging weather-driven demand in a retail business. I'm Scott Bernhardt. I'll be the MC for this session. Joining me is Erin and Björn. I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a moment. I want to say thank you for coming to this session. Talk about how to not get surprised by the weather. Right. So many times you see people either surprised or their systems are chasing the weather. I'll talk to you about how to avoid all of that, right? What do we do about the weather? It's really the purpose of this session today. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Erin and Björn to introduce themselves. As I said, I'm Scott Bernhardt. I am president at Planalytics, and I'll be your host today. Erin, if you could, please.
Good morning. I'm Erin Blackburn-Smith. I am the vice president of brand analytics for Tropical Smoothie Cafe. If you're not familiar with us, we are a fast casual smoothie and food concept, and we have about 1,600, actually now I think like 1,650 locations in the US. Personally, I've been with Tropical Smoothie for 6.5 years. Prior to that, I also worked in marketing analytics for Popeyes and Mellow Mushroom.
Wonderful, thank you. Björn?
Good morning. My name is Björn Olausson, and I am the director of data and analytics for Reitan Convenience. We are a family-owned retail business in the Nordics and the Baltics, and we operate 1,600 outlets in 7 markets across Sweden and the Nordics.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you both. To get to the end. Great, thank you. So today, as I said, we're going to go through, talk about the weather, what we do about the weather, how do we action weather, how do we handle the weather, right, and understand what it's doing to the business. So today I'm going to start us out with a few what I'm calling terms and definitions. Those of us who work in this space, we tend to speak in our own language a little bit, so I want to make sure everything is understood. So if you hear me ask a question and I say, well, the WDD or something like that, I'm talking about the weather-driven demand. Right, and that is the lift or drag that the weather brings to the situation, to the product, to the store, to what the store manager or the supplier has to deal with. What we're really talking is that weather-driven demand. So if I say, so Björn, the WDD is, that's what I'm talking about, right? Is that weather-driven demand? It's a set of metrics, right? There's basically how much does the weather help me or hurt me in that situation. So the biggest, most important is weather-driven demand. We may throw out a few concepts as well, such as weather sensitivity. How good or how bad can the weather help this product perform in that store, online, what have you, and also weather volatility. How much weather wiggle, right? If you think about it, right? How much can the weather really do to that product? What is the best? What is the worst? What is the mean and the middle of how the product can perform based on the weather? So we'll be throwing out these type of concepts, but I want to make sure when I say, Erin, WDDs, you use them for you know what we're talking about, okay? So weather-driven demand is the one we're going to mostly come back to today. And we use that weather-driven demand in a number of different ways. As I said, it's a set of metrics because different parts of the business will need different kind of points of view and different use of those metrics across their business. For example, if you're in marketing, you may not really be too interested in the performance of the weather last year as you are the weather the next 10 days, right? I need to know now. It's marketing, right? That's what you need to do. Whereas for performance analysis or finance or some operations, people like that, they're very interested in the comp, right? What's my comp to last year and all like that. Both weather situations, great questions to ask around the weather, but very different points of view. As I mentioned, operations is another one that has a different perspective on the weather, similar to that. You can't be at the NRF in 2026 and not mention AI, right? If you have walked the floor. We also, again, weather has a very appropriate place within an AI environment. We take the approach of basically being plugged in the Model Context Protocol, the MCP. Those of you familiar with that, into your environment, so that anyone in your organization can go in and say, okay, what happened to me? My stores performed poorly in Chicago last weekend. Why? And it comes back with, well, there's construction in front of these stores. It's this. The weather was this, and the weather-driven demand was that. Right, to make it easily, and the democratization, if you will, of the weather's impact on the business. There's use in planning and allocation. Again, very different perspective than all the ones I mentioned before. about how, am I going to look at the weather? You can action the weather. A forecast beyond 14 days is not nearly as reliable as the one for tomorrow. That doesn't mean you can't do anything about the weather. There's a lot of actions you can take, 3-6 months ahead of time. Again, not specific, but general use cases that may come up in today's conversation. And then last but certainly not least is replenishment, that very systemic approach where it's less about people, more about the systems. So you'll see in here, we'll be talking a little bit about weather-driven demand in all of those situations. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with some questions and give these folks a chance to speak as well. So Erin, I'm going to start with you, if we could. As you mentioned, the Tropical Smoothie Cafe, right? Trying to get the cafe in there. Tropical Smoothie Cafe has over 1,600 locations, 1,650, I think you said. All right. It's a sprawling footprint. If you haven't tried it, go. It's delicious. And to try the items. But can you talk about how weather-driven demand analytics have helped you more effectively evaluate the sales results, the performance, the different programs, promotions, and things across the business?
Yeah, so a huge part of what I do is sales analysis. That includes both the kind of more high-level sales trends, how our performance is doing, and then the more specific look at specific marketing initiatives, or if we are running any tests, reading the results of those. And with any of that kind of analysis, one of the most important things that you have to do is remove as much of the noise as possible from the read. And for us, weather is almost always going to be the biggest noise. As you can expect, we are very weather sensitive. So most of our sales come from smoothies and smoothie bowls. So these are things that people very much associate with summertime, nice weather. That's when they want them. And that is really going to be what causes the vast majority of variability in our sales performance day to day. So actually in the past, I've even run correlations on our year-over-year performance with year-over-year temperature variation, and the correlation is about 80%, and that's just temperature. So that doesn't even include if it's overcast or if it's raining or there's a hurricane or snow or anything like that. So it's a huge factor, and if we do not account for it in analysis, it is going to distort the way that we see the results. So now that we have the WDDs, we are able to use those. So when I'm looking at overall sales performance, I'll adjust our sales performance by the WDD to get a better idea of, okay, this is how we are actually performing. And then when I'm looking at more specifically, like a market test or something like that, usually when we do a market test, I'll have it in a market and then I'll have a control that we're measuring it against. And I can look at the WDDs in those different markets and determine if I need to adjust the results at all. Or often what I'll do is if we have a few days that are maybe very differently impacted by weather in the different markets, I'll just pull those from the read so it's not distorting the results. So really both on a kind of more overall sales performance basis and then also on that more specific, test basis, it is helpful just to kind of get us a better understanding of how we actually are performing and what we are doing is impacting sales versus other factors, and that really helps us to make better decisions.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Bjorn, I'm going to move on to you for the next question. Right? Your convenience store, you have customers coming in several times a week, sometimes several times a day. Right, in some markets, and you're running 7 brands across 7 countries in the Nordics and the Baltics, 1,600 stores serving 800,000 people. Right, that's daily. How do you plan to incorporate the weather-driven demand analytics into operations, and what are the key objectives in the application areas? How are you going to apply it?
Well, first of all, I think to give a bit of context, convenience is mainly impulse driven. And that might be the same for Tropical Smoothie, I guess, to some extent at least. But we have also experienced a drop for a long time in traditional categories like tobacco, newspapers, and transportation tickets that has been more destinational. And during the last period, we've focused a lot of energy into becoming more of a food convenience business. And that also makes us probably more exposed to impulse buying. And then of course we're heavily dependent upon the footfall outside of our stores, because if the footfall goes away, so does a large share of our customers. So we need to understand what factors impact the footfall. And we have been talking about weather for a long time, and of course believe that weather is an important factor. And now you have helped us to understand how much it impacts. It's a big impact. But the important question is then, of course, what can we do? Can we do anything? Can we act on the weather to improve our business? Or are we just sort of a victim to the weather gods, so to speak? Because then we could just sit back and accept it. And that's the way we want to implement this now, to understand more and test. So we're going to do. We're planning a test now in Norway to try to act with our primary hypothesis on what we can do. So we use your information to learn. Then we build hypotheses that we can test. Then we learn more, and we build new hypotheses and we test. So that's the way we plan to incorporate your solution.
It's interesting. You both, you realize that weather's a factor. Why not measure it, right? It seems, it seems like, of course, weather is. So let's figure it out. And to your point, let's do something about it. So, Erin, I'm going to switch to you on the next question, kind of picking up on that theme. You talked a little bit about sales reporting, very important, very valuable. How about sales forecasting? You talk a little bit about how the WD helps with sales forecasting at Tropical Smoothie Cafe.
Yeah. So at Tropical Smoothie, sales forecasting is very important to our leadership and ownership. It has very high visibility in the organization. And I do very detailed daily level sales forecasting for the entire year. And that's going to include impacts from pretty much everything. So, media spend, LTOs, menu changes, holidays, really anything that can materially impact sales. And really, for us, any daily level sales forecast that does not account for weather is going to be pretty useless, because that's going to be the main variability day to day. So I now, in my sales forecast file, have the WDDs built in as a key input there. So basically, I have my forecast of what I think sales would be, and then I add in that WDD to adjust that to get to our final sales forecast number. Of course, as Scott mentioned, weather forecasts are not accurate for the entire year. So you have your next 2 weeks where you have the really accurate forecast, and that's going to adjust it and kind of explain a lot of that variability. But I do the daily forecasting for the entire year, and we don't have an accurate weather forecast for months in advance. But I am able to use the Planalytics data for the entire year, and that's because in the restaurant space, the primary way that we measure success is year-over-year performance, or same-store sales, so year-over-year performance in stores that have been open last year and then also this year. And so half of that equation is what happened last year. So Planalytics is able to give us WDDs for the entire year that is based on basically, so if weather this year performed in line with historical averages, how that would compare to what actually happened last year. So I'm able to build that into the sales forecast. So it makes it much more reasonable, even though we don't have the specifics of what is actually going to happen in the weather. It accounts for any rollover impact we'll see in the later months. So it helps short term in a very accurate way. And then in the long-term forecast, it really helps us to just be a lot more reasonable with our expectations.
Yeah, it's a smoothing type of operation, right? To do that, and it's funny how you smooth it a little bit on each store, all of a sudden you roll to the top and you get a pretty darn accurate number. It's funny around that. So thank you for that. Bjorn, on to you. And then you're one of our newer customers. And most customers for Planalytics, they start with what we call a weather impact analysis. That's that kind of understanding. What is the weather doing to me, right? In a very detailed level. And then before we action the weather, we want to understand it, right? What it's doing specifically to your business. So you started there, but moving on to the next phase, right? But what drove you first to do the weather impact analysis? I mean, you're a large organization. You could, you have resources and all like that. It really comes down to that question: build versus buy, right? Why buy rather than build? For you,
that's a good question. And being an analytics guy, I of course I have tried to build it myself, and spent quite a lot of time on trying to do that. But we've also realized that it's really complex, both in terms of how you need to aggregate the data, both in terms of time and geography. So, for instance, if we can measure, or how should we attribute the weather to a specific store? That's one important question. Do we pick the closest weather station? That was how we did it. But then the quality of the data could be really bad. So you should have used the weather station a bit further away, but with better quality. And also, should you look at it by hour, by day, or by week? And then there's, of course, a lot of correlation with seasonality that you also need to understand. What's the impact of different weather attributes across different seasons and locations? So it's really complex, and you have been working on this for 30 years, something like that. So that was sort of the driver to be able to leverage your expertise and knowledge in this area.
Yeah. No, you bring up a few good points. If it's 10 degrees in Stockholm, well, now it'd be very different than 10 degrees in April, versus it's 50 degrees in Philadelphia today, and it's could be 50 degrees in Miami. Very different result for Tropical Smoothie as well, right? So there's a lot of variability just to manage, just to understand before you even start, right? Looking at forecasting and affecting your business.
Yeah.
All right, Erin, I'm going to go back to you, talking a little bit about weather-driven demand. I want to get to application, right? Starting first with could you talk a little bit about how you applied to marketing and the engagements and the promotions and things like that for Tropical Smoothie?
Yeah, so there's lots of marketing stuff we do that we have to plan very far in advance, and we don't have a ton of flexibility to change. But we do have a good amount of levers that we can pull on a short-term basis in reaction to the weather, specifically more in our digital sales channels. So a big example of that would be for third-party delivery. So that's like your Uber Eats, your DoorDash. One thing we found from the Planalytics data is while we are very weather sensitive across the board, that isn't even across channels. So our third-party delivery channels are not as weather sensitive as our in-cafe sales, which of course makes sense. So if we see in the forecast that the WDDs are forecasted to be very negative for us overall, but not as much in our third-party delivery sales, which is very common, we are able to turn on more aggressive offers in those channels to really try to get that sale, which has actually been very important for us. Like we've definitely noticed a big difference since we've started doing that this winter, because third party is really important because it really helps kind of insulate us a little bit when we have these very strong negative impacts, that we can actually protect some of those sales and not just have a god-awful week because the weather was bad. So it's been really important there. And then another example that we started doing very recently is weather-based triggered marketing. So that's basically like by market, we'll have a list of specific weather conditions, and if those are met, it will trigger a marketing message or offer to guests on our app users or email list in those markets. And what that'll often look like is if, say, it's like it's the first really sunny, nice day in a while, we might just send a push notification to kind of remind guests that we're there and say like, oh, it feels like summer, let's celebrate with a smoothie or something like that. Whereas on the other side, if it's going to be very bad weather, we know we might have to incentivize guests a little more to come get a smoothie or, come to our restaurant. So in those cases, we're more likely to send an offer to guests. And with that, we'll focus on the channels or product lines that are not as weather sensitive. So rather than pushing a discount for a smoothie, we might do a food discount because that's more attractive in those times. So we've used the Planalytics data to really inform that strategy as far as when we should be sending those messages and then also what we should be focusing on. So like what's most attractive to guests in that specific weather environment.
Well, that's great, being able to use the weather, or they say, well, no, if the weather's going to be nice, why run a promotion, right? Why give money away if the weather's going to be nice? Whereas sometimes you have to entice a little bit more. That's great. Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to open these next couple questions and see how much time we have to both of you. And Erin, you've been with us a bit longer, so I'm going to put you on the spot first again, if that's okay. One of the important questions when you purchase anything in a company, we need to have a return on investment, an ROI. Okay, we're going to spend this money. What am I going to get in return? And some of the metrics, especially when you're talking about weather, which is affecting all of the stores, all the promotion, can you talk a little bit about some of the metrics and how you measure the return that you get by using weather-driven demand at Tropical Smoothie?
Yeah, I would say the first very highly visible way that we measure the success is in the accuracy of our sales forecast. So that is super important to our leadership and ownership, and it is something we track on a weekly basis, our variation to how we thought we would perform versus how we performed. And I think that's very important it's important for planning, knowing how we're tracking to our sales goals, but then also, especially from like the ownership perspective, I think it's important that we are close because it really gives confidence that we know what is going on with the business. And when we're making recommendations, we have a good idea of how different things are going to impact the business. So we've been tracking that variation to forecast, and it has gotten substantially more accurate since we've added in the WDDs. So if you were to ask our leadership team, where do you guys really see the value? That's what they would say. So that's where they're really happy with the product, that it's made our sales forecasting more accurate, I think is incredibly valuable for them. And then also kind of more from a concrete ROI perspective, for any of our marketing initiatives, whenever we can, we measure the ROI of those specifically. So for example, like with the third-party delivery offers or with the weather-based triggers, all of those we track individually, usually versus a control if we can, to get the ROI. So we have that confirmation that we are getting a positive ROI from the application of the data.
That's great. Thank you. Björn, let's see if you can top that one, right?
Well, as I said in the beginning, we are mainly doing tests, so testing and evaluating, and so for us it's quite simple actually. It's sales, number of customers, or gross profit. That's the KPIs that we use to evaluate, and I think it's also, I'm also keen on keeping KPIs really simple to so that everyone can understand and relate to them. I mean, I think you need to have a metric that everyone understands what happens if it increases, and how can I make it go up, and so on.
No, that's great. I say keeping it simple when you can, right? Is always best. So I'm gonna stay on you on that, right? Because really, when you take on the weather, that's really what we're talking about: taking on the weather, understanding it, and using it. our recommendation is you start targeted, start small, if you will, start in a particular area and then grow from there. So Björn, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and where are you starting and where do you see it growing? And then Erin, I'm going to come back to you on that.
First of all, as I mentioned previously, it's a lot about testing, and that's just for us to understand how can we impact our sales or number of customers based on the weather or the weather forecasts. And there's a lot to learn in that area. First of all, we're testing out activation on the Q-commerce. For instance, we're also interested in understanding more how does the weather relate to different categories or products? Which one should we push? So that's the thing I see in the closest future to sort of develop those insights for us. But of course, there's also we're doing our own order proposals for our franchisees, and weather, since that's an important sort of factor impacting our sales, it would make sense to incorporate that information in those models as well. So that's probably the next
step.
Potential outside of the insights and testing. Yeah,
testing and that communication. That's important. Erin, do you?
Yeah, so I think the biggest area I think I can see this really growing is getting the data in the hands of franchisees. So as of now, we just use it on a corporate level. I think if franchisees were able to have access and use it for planning, particularly staffing, that would be really impactful. And then also just having a better understanding of their own performance and what's going on in the business. The other area that's kind of come up recently would be in supply chain forecasting. So that's an area that organization-wide we want to become more sophisticated in. So I think that the weather data is going to be a very key input into that as we kind of start that process.
Great. Oops, I'm trying to get that. There we go. All right. Well, that concludes my questions. Thank you both very much. You both were excellent panelists. I very much appreciate it. For those of you in the audience, we have a QR code if you want more information about Planalytics, how this works. Easy to get QR code up there. Also, please come visit us at booth 4039. Right, we will be there all day, ready to answer any and all questions, or tap the NRF as well. They have white papers and information about us as well on nrf.com. So again, my thanks to you both. I appreciate it, and thank you all for coming today. Right, have a good day and enjoy the weather. Thank you.
Thank you.